Ladies, gentlemen, and pals of all ages, with new updates come new priorities when it comes to how you set yourself up within Palworld. Whether you are using default maximum base settings, or maybe you've done a bit of world setting fiddling to give yourself extra bases, you still probably want to make sure that you are getting the most out of the base that you have, and the pals that are within them. So today we're going to talk about what is essentially the singular perfect base location for generating as many resources as possible, and then we'll go over all the best pals in the game to use within your base for the various things that you will need, covering all of the relevant work suitabilities. First up then, we've got the location, and this right here at the end of this thin pathway towards the tip of the red cliff on your map is the only spot on the entire island of Feybreak where there are 3 hexalite quartz nodes within the radius of one base circle. So for making new equipment, this is just the best that you're going to get. As well, there is a little oil node set up here, so you can extract oil within the same location too. As for the rest of your setup, I'm not going to dictate exactly how you're going to make your bases, that's up to you of course, but as far as efficiency, always remember that verticality gives you a lot more space to work with if you build upwards, and remember that as of this point, every earlier game resources and things that are from like before Feybreak are collectible from one of the auto farms that you can create at this base. The things like the logging site, the ore site, the coal site, the sulfur mining site, all of these, and meaning that this one location can get you pretty much everything that you need in the game except for chromite, but the only real solution to that is bringing a max condensed smoky around to some caves. So this really is the most effective location given what we've actually been offered by the devs here. That said, the next step is the pals themselves, and before we get down into the nitty gritty here, I want to be clear about what we'll be going over, which for the most part is the pals that can hit the highest rank of each work suitability naturally, the best passives and general practices to make the pals more effective at their job, and then just a generally good spread of a few pals that between them can functionally take care of your whole endgame base to a very high level. Before that, however, for those that don't know, when essence condensing into a pal, which is how you give them more star ranks, the final star rank also improves all work suitabilities that the pal has by 1 rank. So any pal with a naturally level 4 work suitability becomes level 5, which is the maximum that you can reach. So anytime you hear me talking about a level 4 natural work suitability pal, I'm saying that because that's how they spawn out in the wild before you make them into level 5. This is the more normal way of reaching level 5 work suitabilities, and there is now also the condensed all-purpose pal extract that you can buy with dog coins from the metal merchants that rotate around the churches, and I highly recommend using this for the final condense, as that makes it the equivalent of saving 64 pals. That said, there is one other method to raise work suitabilities for pals, which are the applied technique manuals. These exist for every work suitability skill and allow you to forcibly increase the level of a pal's work suitability by 1. Through these, you can force pals that wouldn't normally reach level 5 in a work suitability to actually be able to hit that maximum. This can totally shift what the best pals are, however the drop rate on these items is so unbelievably low, as in less than 1/100% from the various dungeons and supply chests within the game, up to still less than 1/10% from the level 60 oil rig golden chest that you can only open once after you defeat the boss there per respawn. So to put it simply, if you have enough of these items, the best pal for each work suitability actually just becomes anyone that is naturally nocturnal, so dark type, as that saves a passive skill slot. And if there are multiple that applies to, then it is whatever one is physically fastest and has the lowest hunger drain, though that's getting into some really nerdy sort of number stuff around the game at that point. Suffice it to say, for the average player, you won't be basing your work pals around these manuals because they are so rare, so I won't be going into detail on them today. And if you do, it's just enough of a boost to apply them to a nocturnal replacement for what would otherwise be a normal level 5 work suitability pal. That said, if you have an insane pile of these, it is worth mentioning there are pals that also have like 5 separate work suitability options and are also naturally nocturnal. So if you boost literally all of their available suitabilities to 5, you can get a ton of value out of a singular pal, but obviously it can't do multiple activities at the same time anyways, so that's maybe a little bit more than just a bit overkill. Moving on then to more specifics, let's start with your Kindling pals. As of this moment, there are 2 pals with natural level 4 Kindling, and these are Blasmate Ryu and Yormantide Ignis. The former of these can only be acquired from defeating the Blasmate Ryu level 55 raid fight, whereas Yormantide Ignis can be acquired at least a little bit early on, and can even now be bred into through Yormantide and Blaze Howl for an earlier acquisition. That said, if you have the choice between the two, you would generally go with Blasmate Ryu instead for 2 main reasons. The first is that the gigantic furnace, which is the new highest level furnace, can be used by 4 pals at the same time. Yormantide Ignis is absolutely massive just by its default size, and that makes it really awkward to arrange 4 of them standing in a circle around this furnace, and while Blasmate Ryu is large, it is much smaller by comparison. The other reason is that Blasmate Ryu is also a level 4 mining pal by default too, so whenever you aren't cooking ores into ingots or cooking food into other food, food, your Blasphemous Ryu can go off and be the highest work suitability level for a miner as well, and help out any of your various mining operations and material farms too. Then for watering pals, there are two natural level 4 waterers, the first being Yormantide Standard, and the other being Phalaris Aqua. Generally speaking, Phalaris Aqua is actually better for this job through a mix of again being smaller than a Yormantide, which just makes it easier to maneuver around the base, but then also just not only being a fast moving flying pal, which makes moving around the place more efficient, but also it has natural level 3 transporting too, boosted to level 4 when fully condensed to 2, which combined with its natural speed means when things don't need watering, it's also a very effective transporting pal too, which is extremely valuable to have as a backup work suitability here. Phalaris Aqua then can be bred into before reaching Feybreak through the combination of regular Phalaris and actually Yormantide himself, which I mentioned here too. For planting specifically, there is still only one pal with natural level 4 work suitability, which is Lylene. This isn't that bad of a thing though either, as Lylene also reaches level 4 handiwork, level 3 gathering, and level 4 medicine production when fully condensed, so it has a nice suite of secondary suitabilities for when the planting isn't needed, as it's just not something you need to do 100% of the time. Lylene can be bred into relatively early on through the combination of Petalia and Mossanda. Then next up we have electricity generating pals, and this is quite an important one for a lot of bases, and there are now two pals that have natural level 4 electricity generation, which are Orzerk, the old classic best electricity pal, and now also Azurmane, new to Feybreak. For pure electricity generation, they are essentially equal to each other, however Orzerk comes out a bit ahead in my eyes because he can also reach level 4 handiwork and he's got some transporting for when he isn't needed to fill up your electricity stores. Orzerk can be bred into from a much earlier available set of pals, which are Relaxaurus and Grisbolt, with Grisbolt also being able to be bred down from Rayhound and Mossanda, which are even earlier in the game progression. After that we have Handicraft, and things get a touch more interesting here, because there are three pals that have natural level 4 Handicraft: Anubis, Selene, and Splatterina, which is new to the Feybreak update. Two of these three are dark pals, which gives them a natural advantage in that they are naturally nocturnal. This allows them to work more hours out of the day as they don't sleep at night. However, Splatterina is much easier to acquire than Selene is, being breedable from the combination of Capridy and Penking, which are both available quite early on in the game. From there's actually a ton of debate between whether Anubis or Splatterina is really better. Splatterina gains an extra 20% work speed, as Anubis would need to use a passive slot to be nocturnal otherwise, but Anubis has mining as a secondary work suitability, which is always useful to have more of, and Anubis is just much faster movement within the base too, which adds a lot as well. Generally speaking, I personally lean Splatterina on this, but they are within a few percentage points of each other at most, at least as far as efficiency goes. Then we have the gathering work suitability, and to be honest with you, this one is sort of pointless to maximize, as you only need it for one step of the farming process, and you could go out of your way to breed a perfect Frostallion Noct, as they have natural level 4 gathering suitability, but that pal has no secondary work suitability, so it would spend 99% of the time just sitting around at your base doing nothing at all, and the other 1% being really efficient at gathering. So while I feel the need to mention that it is technically the best at gathering, you are better off long term ignoring this one and just taking advantage of the fact that Lylene, the best planter, will also be level 3 gathering once you've condensed into it. As for lumbering, there is only one pal that has natural level 4 lumbering, and this is Celestier, so no competition here at all. To get this pal as early as possible, you can use Eikthyr Terra and Gildane as the parents, and to get Gildane earlier than Feybreak, you want to use the combination of Hellzephyr and Dinosom, both of which you can catch pretty early in your journey. Next up is mining, and if you did the Kindling pal that I recommended, you'll already have a top tier miner, but there is technically one above that, which is Astegon. Like Blasphemous Ryu, who we talked about before, Astegon has natural level 4 mining, so he can reach level 5 through condensing, but as a dark type pal, he is naturally nocturnal, so he works throughout the night, mining more hours each day as a result, making it more efficient to build this one as your high tier pal for the purposes of specifically mining. You can breed into this using your Orzerk from the electricity section, as well as Grisbolt and Orzerk breeding together makes Astegon, which is a nice little sort of extra efficiency loop in this process. The next work suitability then is medicine production, and 9 times out of 10 you don't really need a maxed out medicine production pal, but for the sake of it, there are two pals pals do have natural level 4 suitability for this, which are Belenoir and Belenoir Libero, which you can get from their respective raids. That said, I personally still really like Lylene for just sort of filling this slot anyways, as with full essence condensing, Lylene still hits level 4 medicine production, which is just under the maximum, and it also does multiple other jobs that only need tending to occasionally. So it's just sort of a great jack of all trades type of solution to make multiple work suitabilities filled. Then next up is cooling, and there are only 2 pals in the entire game with natural level 4 cooling, which are Frostallion and Bastigor. Frostallion can only do cooling and nothing else, whereas Bastigor, when full essenced, reaches level 4 in both lumbering and mining. This gives him some quite potent secondary work suitabilities to take advantage of. The only ways to breed into Bastigor are through 2 of itself, or through the combination of Anubis and Frostallion. So the way I see it is, if you're going to be getting a Frostallion anyways, why not just breed it one step further and get the Bastigor for the extra work suitabilities that it can give you too. Then finally, because obviously farming is its own thing, the final one to actually talk about is transporting, which is also sort of its own whole special deal. Unlike the other work suitabilities, the generally most important part of transporting effectiveness is literal movement speed of the pal. Transporting level as a work suitability simply defines the amount of things a pal can carry in one go, which is important, but arguably far less important than the speed at which it takes those items to the storage container and then goes back to pick up more items. With that considered, the overall best statted transporter is Noclem, who is only about 20% slower than the fastest transporting pals, while still having natural level 4 work suitability for transporting, allowing him to hit level 5 through condensing. That said, well, on paper, that makes this seem like the best transporting pal. Realistically, you'll actually get better mileage out of either Phalaris or Phalaris Aqua, who only hit level 4 transporting even when condensed into, but have the fastest transporting speed among all pals. That said, it's worth noting, while you can overlap transporting with the high-level watering suitability of Phalaris Aqua, that maximizing the efficiency of these two things actually uses different passives, so you wouldn't really want the same pal doing both jobs for this one specifically, unless you'd have very few watering needs. On that note, now let's talk about the passives that you want to aim for on your work pals. These line up to being almost the same across the board for all work suitabilities, with transporting pals being the only ones that function properly differently, as they benefit from movement speed rather than work speed. That said, for every other work suitability, you want pals to have the remarkable craftsmanship rainbow passive, which is a 75% increase to work speed, the artisan passive for 50% increase to work speed, the work slave passive for a 30% increase to work speed at the cost of 30% lower attack, and then the final slot is either nocturnal or vampiric to make pals work through the night instead of sleeping. For a pal that is dark type and naturally does not need to sleep, you don't need that passive at all, so you would instead replace it with the Sirius passive for 20% bonus work speed too. So as a total, this will boost the work speed of your pal by 155% for the non-dark pals that you add nocturnal to, or 175% for dark pals, and that is just extremely potent of a difference to not having the passives in the first place. For transporting pals specifically, you instead want movement speed, so you want movement speed boosting passives. For this, that would be Legend, which is 20% attack and defense, but also 15% bonus movement speed, Swift, which is 30% bonus movement speed, Runner, which is 20% bonus movement speed, and then either Nimble for 10% bonus movement speed, or either Nocturnal or Vampiric if the pal is in the dark type, so you can have it work through the night. As for how to get these passives onto the correct pals, we have a whole video dedicated to breeding and updated for Feybreak as well that you can check out, but the basics are that when breeding, the eggs created have a chance of taking on the passives from the parent pals. So you breed until you hit the right passives on some possible parents, then you breed the pals that have some of the correct passives until you create pals that have the perfect set of 4 passives, and then that's just a very brief rundown of how to do this. Aside from this, there is one final topic that I wanted to go over here, which is just a good setup of these pals to cover your base in as few slots as possible. First up, I recommend having 4 Blasmet Ryu. These can keep your gigantic furnace running at full speed whenever you're trying to get stuff created through it, and when they are on a break from kindling, they are max level miners, with the only thing that makes them worse than an Astagon being that they have to sleep at night. The reason for 4 of these specifically is because the gigantic furnace can be powered by 4 pals at the same time. Then I generally recommend 2 Phalaris Aqua, both built with the transporting passives instead of the work speed passives, as after you get the refrigerated crusher at level 52, pure watering becomes much more of a sporadic use work skill rather than one that is consistently happening and active. So having raw level 5 water is good enough when it comes up for things like planting and taking care of food, and then their main focus is actually transporting resources with high movement speed. Then I always recommend 1 Lylene. This can cover planting, gathering, medicine production, and then just also assist with handiwork when nothing else needs doing. And it does all of this to a relatively high standard too. For pure lumbering, if you really want to have like a logging site that's running perfectly all the time, you would want a Celestier as the best lumberer. However, I'd say most endgame players probably have more wood than they can shake a stick at, so instead for those players, I'd say just use Bastigor. This is the best cooling pal, but it also has the ability to reach level 4 lumbering if you ever need some more wood generated. Level 4 mining as well to help with your mining operations when cooling or lumbering isn't needed. That said, I recommend having 2 Bastigors, one to manage your refrigerated crusher and the other for any other cooling needs that you may have, and then lumbering or excess mining too when that doesn't happen. For mining, I recommend picking up again 2 Astegon for your more dedicated mining projects, as we have a bunch of pals already with secondary work suitability as mining to do the lower priority ore sites and stuff when other stuff doesn't need doing. Then you'll need a minimum of 1 ore Zerk for your electricity generation. Whether you need more than 1 basically just depends on the power consumption of your base, so that is a bit more of a personal call there. Then finally, just as many Splatterinas or Anubis as you want to fill in for handicraft purposes, as well as their secondary suitabilities too. Let's call it 3 of these just for the sake of saying that's 15 pal slots filled that can efficiently completely manage an endgame base with all the different parts that you'd want collecting and crafting inside as far as resources go, leaving space for 5 more slots for pals that you can use however you want. Though most of the time I would probably recommend just having it be a pile more handicraft pals whenever you're trying to craft things super quickly. Or if there are pals that you just have a personal attachment and want to have them hanging around too, that's what this is for as well. That just about does it for today then, everyone. The best place on Feybreak Island to set up your sort of main resource management base, the best pals to use for each work suitability, the passives that you want on them, and then just sort of a template set up for a highly efficient set of pals to run your base for you once it's ready. Hopefully you've enjoyed this and it makes your life easier in the game moving forwards, and of course if you have any tips of your own for players related to this, then feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.